everybody, to our live Q&A on reopening association amenities. Glad you can join us. And with us today are Nancy Ayers, Serena Brancato, and Matthew Goldberg. We have got a little bit of a varied panel. We've got insurance, community association manager, and the legal side all covered on our panel today. And so we're going to be talking about the hows, the ifs, and all of that when it comes to your association's common areas like your pools, your gyms, your party spaces. There's so many questions about how you should go about opening this up now that the restrictions on the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing are starting to ease up as we go through the phases. And so I'm going to give these guys an opportunity to introduce themselves. We'll start at the left with Nancy. All right. So, my bad. When I had you guys muted on the last screen, I didn't unmute you for this screen. Nancy, do you mind introducing yourself again?
Sure. Nancy Ayers from Alliant Insurance. I'm the insurance representative on the panel, and probably not the favorite professional at this point, giving you advice, only because I'm saying no to a lot of the openings in the community associations, just trying to keep the board and association out of trouble. So I'll be giving the insurance risk management perspective today.
All right, Serena.
I'm Serena Brancato. I am the property manager of Kinsey Park, which is managed by Associa Chicagoland. And it is a unique community. So we have sort of townhomes, high-rise, it's really dense community. So in times like these, it's been very interesting to try to navigate how to manage things like social distancing and things like that. So happy to help with any recommendations or advice that we can give that has worked for us.
And I'm Matt Goldberg with Richmond, Goldberg and Gorham, the attorney participant today. We also like to call ourselves RG squared. I'm also the one who's often saying no, or I get the pleasure of pointing at Nancy and say, call Nancy so she can tell you no.
All right, so let's.
I guess I should add that I'm the one who always has to say yes.
Or let's ask our attorney. maybe they'll be able to tell us how we can do it, which is one of the things that we're coming here to do today.
If mom says no, go ask dad. That's the way it works.
Oh yeah. Let's kick off the discussion here today with, I know we have a list of topics that we want to make sure that we cover, but we're also going to be answering our questions from the live chat. So I see Diana's in the chat. If you have any questions, just shoot them in the chat. I'll be reading that as we're going along. And if it makes sense in the current topic, I'll throw it in there. If it's going to be covered in a later topic, then I'll add it in at that point. And if it's not in any of our topics, which I'm sure some of your questions are, they'll be circled back around to at the end. All right? Great. Our first one is going to be about building staff. So during common area space, there's a lot of them that have been closed during all of this. And as they're reopening, how are we keeping our building staff safe?
So I think I can provide some insight as to what's worked for us. Initially with staff coverage, we're essential workers, so everybody came to work. Of course, we provided facial coverings. I think the biggest challenge in March was, where do we get these supplies, right? So that was really, really challenging because there was such a shortage. So one of the things we did was reach out to the community itself, and it turns out there are some seamstresses or people who know how to sew as a hobby. So we had some residents donate face masks that they made for our staff, in addition to some that we were able to get. And so that was a big thing, is making sure we were able to provide them with the PPE. And so now that things are opening up, we need to make sure that they are covered with enough PPE to handle, 5-6 days a week, 8 hours a day, in those working conditions, because they are now going into clean spaces that weren't used for the last 2 months, like the fitness center and things like that are now starting to gradually open. So that was the biggest thing, is the PPE. And then in regard to buildings that perform work orders inside units, we limited that right off the bat. So initially it was emergencies only, like if you had an active water leak. But if we did have to enter, we really put it out there to the ownership to sort of say, look, our focus is certainly to provide a service and to continue to help. However, we have to keep our staff safe, which in turn, the goal is also to keep you safe. So we asked them not to be home or to sort of seclude themselves to a totally different room if we had to enter. And so that kept people far apart. They were wearing masks and gloves, and the appropriate protective equipment if they had to go in. And we just eliminated all non-essential work orders. So anything that was going to keep them in units for a long period of time, changing light fixtures and things like that weren't necessary, we took off the docket for the time being. So that was a big one. And surprisingly, people were very receptive. Our impression was that the demand for work orders would increase since most people are working from home. So they might have figured, okay, I have time to sort of get these things done. But they really, once we put out that the priority was to keep them safe as well as the staff safe, we really try to focus on that, and it went well. And I think most people understand, the severity of the situation. So.
Yeah, I would just add to that one question that comes up a lot in terms of keeping staff safe and keeping everyone safe is, should unit owners be required to wear face masks in the building, and can we do that? And so one of the important distinctions is, are you creating a policy for the association of we want everyone to wear face masks, or are you creating a rule that you could enforce with some sort of fine if people aren't following them? And so, it's not only, jumping ahead a little bit, but it applies to this as well, for keeping the doorman safe when people are passing by, keeping the janitor safe, the other building personnel. Should the unit owners be wearing face masks? And if so, can we somehow enforce that? Yes, but it depends on which mechanism you want to use. Do you want to police it? Do you want to have a rule in place, or do you want to make it a policy where people should follow common sense and just do it?
And then to add on the insurance end for essential workers, Governor Pritzker did sign on Friday. I know we've gone back and forth with workers' compensation for essential workers in Illinois. And initially, Governor Pritzker included essential workers under workers' compensation, and then business got involved and said, wait a second, hold on, let's look at what we're doing here. But at the end of the day, on Friday, Governor Pritzker did sign an order That would include essential workers under workers' compensation. And there are some exceptions. This will run from, mid-March until the end of the year, end of 2020. If an employee has not been in the building for the past 14 days, that would be an exception that may not be considered under workers' compensation. Or if the association can prove that they followed all the guidelines and provided protective equipment, that would be considered in the decision for the Workers' Compensation Commission. Also, if the employee contracted from another party, an alternate source, and didn't contract the COVID-19 at the building, that would be considered. So what we're encouraging employers to track the safety procedures and have everything in order in case something comes up. If you do have a case and an employee comes to you and feels that they caught the COVID-19 at work, that's a claim that really should be reported and allow the Workers' Compensation Commission to make that decision on the claim.
All right, great. So the first kind of common area that I know that we want to talk about during the Q&A here today is going to be those, like the party spaces, the community rooms, right? Now, I have a question as far as community rooms go, as far as where do you usually see these? Are these a mid to high rise kind of exclusive thing, or is this something you see in a lot of HOAs? So that's a question I do have as we maybe jump into this. But then how would these go about being opened? And I guess in general, I'll let you guys jump into it.
So from our perspective, we do have a hospitality room, a party room. And so that space is not a space before COVID that was open 24/7. It's a rentable space. And so essentially we completely closed it off during, the second phase. For this phase 3, we said with the stipulation of a party under 10 people that was comprised of residents only. So essentially anybody that had a reservation canceled it because typically that space is used for baby showers or things like that where they're bringing people in from the outside. And that space that we have can hold over 100 people. So it's a larger space. And so coincidentally, no one really wanted to pay for rental of that space if you couldn't use it for outside folks and for any greater than 10 people. So I think that for us, that particular amenity was easier to manage given the stipulations.
Man, are you?
I'll say no first.
Go ahead.
No. Okay. So, the information on this is changing all the time. And so one of the things I was looking at was a new piece that was put out by the Illinois Department of Public Health on swimming pools, which I know we're going to talk about a little later, but it does include some other guidance in there. And we were talking about earlier, it says clubhouses, playgrounds, waiting areas, viewing areas, and any other communal gathering places should be closed. It doesn't say must, it says should. And then communal gathering places, it's pretty broad. So does that include your community rooms indoors? Does it apply to outdoors? A lot of this is unclear. But the first thing when it comes to any amenity, I tell any of my clients is, if you're going to open it, assume when, not if. Someone will eventually sue you and say you didn't clean it properly, you didn't maintain it properly, I caught COVID, pay my damages. And the first question any volunteer board should be asking itself is, are we covered on insurance? Are we covered for defense of the case, even if it's going to be really hard for a plaintiff to prove. Because if those protections aren't in place, why would you as a volunteer want to potentially take on that liability?
Right. And I think it's confusing when we see the guidelines that are released for opening pools or for opening the gym or community room. I guess we tend to think, well, then we can open now. Or you're saying that maybe that's not the case, that the guidelines may be one thing, but then we may not be allowed to open those areas. So that would be an issue with insurance. This is really the first time that we've had this situation with a pandemic and with an expectation that insurance policy is going to defend a claim. So without any experience in knowing how the claims are going to be handled, it would be difficult for us to say, yes, you don't have anything to worry about, the insurance will cover it. Based on the policy language, this type of event does not meet some of the definitions of a claim under a policy. It really needs to be an accident or an occurrence that took place. And it's really yet to be determined if just catching the COVID-19 would meet that definition of an accident under a general liability policy. Another condition under the policy is that the event is not expected or intended by the association or the client. And especially if you're not supposed to be opening the community area, and if you decide to open it, then you may expect or intend that that event would occur. And that could be a defense that the insurance company uses to not pay a claim or not defend the association. So really, out of an abundance of caution, we're recommending that associations do not move forward with some of the higher risk activities, opening the pool or having the community areas where people are coming together. There are also a number of exclusions under the policy that could come into play. There are pollution exclusions that may include virus. Some of the mold wording, there are mold exclusions under a general liability form, may include virus wording within the mold wording. So it may not be apparent under your policy whether or not you're covered for this exposure. In addition, a number of companies are starting to add the communicable disease exclusion onto the policy. And this is just, a reaction from what's going on with the pandemic at this time.
Okay, so I have a question from chat from Kathy Slate, and these community rooms, they have a reservation process. Let's say it's like Serena's association here, where we've got a reservation process. Would a waiver of some sort help in covering the association during the reservation process?
So there's two schools of thought with a waiver. One, the obvious, hey, we have a waiver, therefore absolved of us of any liability. And then there's the other school of thought, will the courts enforce the waiver? What happens if, Jane Doe signed the waiver, so maybe you're protected from her, but she alleges she caught COVID in your pool, your community room, your gym, went home and gave it to the rest of her family who didn't sign the waiver. What if Jane Doe brings the kid to the community room or the pool? Waivers for kids, not enforceable. And then there's the insurance side of it, and Nancy can talk to it a little more, but if you're making people sign a waiver, is that an admission you knew you were doing something you probably shouldn't have been doing in the first place?
Right. And I would agree with that it may further enforce that expected or intended exclusion under the policy. Again, not trying to be an expert in this subject, only because we don't know at this point how insurance companies treat each claim. A lot really depends on how the claim is presented too. Whether someone's saying that the association should have known this and then had them sign a waiver, or if it's just being presented as they were negligent in not cleaning up the area and that was the cause of the loss. So there's a lot that goes into how a claim is presented, what the allegations are, and how that fits in within the coverage on the policy.
Oh, more questions coming in on that. Jersey, yes, we'll be doing a recording that's available later of this whole Q&A. You'll be able to watch it at this same link on YouTube. The second that this stream ends, it's going to be available to rewatch here at this same link. Also, I'm going to release the recording of it as an episode of our Common Interest podcast, which is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, any place that you're getting your podcasts from. Just search for the Common Interest podcast. It'll be released on Tuesday. Let's see. From Dick in the chat, should the meeting of the board or of association committees have the same restrictions as the rental of the room?
So a lot of associations have moved to virtual meetings for the obvious right now. I don't, if you're not going to be able to keep your meeting to 10 people or less in a community room, which I don't know if, obviously there's several associations that would meet that anyways, but if they're that size, they probably don't have a community room. If you're a larger association and you can't meet the 10 person in a room, I think you need to move to virtual or make it available in some other format, just out of necessity. I think the other ways you're taking a risk you don't want to take.
Right. I mean, I would agree with that it's just you're taking on more risk. It's even though, you may have the board in the room without unit owners, they're still unit owners and they still can make allegations of negligence and that they caught COVID having to attend the board meeting. Again, it's really more out of abundance of caution that I'm recommending this, but since we don't know how these claims will be handled, that's the recommendation that we need to make.
And just kind of more globally, why these conversations with your attorney and your insurance carrier are so important. If there's a concern it won't be covered, probably could have addressed this earlier, the greater fear is you have a risk of losing the case, which is probably pretty small because someone's going to have to show causation that they did in fact catch COVID because you weren't cleaning properly. That's going to be hard to do unless they can show they were living in a bubble and only came out to go to your common element for 2 weeks. So that's going to be hard to prove, but that's an issue of fact, which goes to trial. It doesn't get decided earlier. So, what you have to worry about is defending the case. And if the insurance carrier is going to say no coverage, we don't have to deny coverage and deny defense, you're going to pay for all the litigation of that case up through trial, which is very, very expensive. And so that's a much higher risk of coming out of pocket for that. And that's really what all of this goes to, is that risk.
Oh yeah, waiver questions are flying in. So there's some good ones here. So from Pedro, can the waiver also state that the person agrees to defend the board against all claims related to the use of the amenity? so that would protect them from the virus spread effect, right? Like they infect somebody else. And kind of similarly, I've seen some retail stores have said like no kids are allowed into the store, and that's different for an association, I'm assuming. Like you can't just say if the waiver's not enforceable for children that you can't allow children into the room or whatever the amenity is. I'm assuming that's a case for associations because it would be an FHA violation, Fair Housing Act.
Right. I think if you can't discriminate based upon familial relationships, you'd be risking a family, an FHA violation if you're saying no kids to this, no kids to that. How it comes out, we're all dealing with this for the first time, but could someone bring the claim? Yes. As to the other question, you can put almost anything you want in the waiver. The problem is, what if the person who signs that doesn't have the money to pay for that defense, which is in all likelihood pretty strong. If they don't have the money to pay for it, that waiver wasn't worth the paper it was printed on.
All right.
Excuse me, the indemnification.
So we'll move into. Okay. Yeah, Serena, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing we did. Waivers were not an option for us for the same reasons Matt discussed, and we had consulted with counsel, and they had very similar recommendations. And we did post like on the fitness center door, and I know we'll get into that later, but because we do have limited access there, we did just post that, this is a space that carries risk. And so just be advised that like if you enter this space, that there is risk like any other enclosed common space that is shared, that this space is not exempt from any transmission of that COVID, whether or not that'll protect us or not. But it almost for us acted as a reminder of like, we're opening this because it's an amenity that people, are really eager to use. We have put, enough limitations at least to allow people to use it throughout the day. But that still doesn't mean that the risk is any more diminished than it would be if we had a waiver or not, right? So we just wanted to make note that this is at your own risk. And so that was something that we felt more comfortable at least making it known.
And I would agree with that too, because in the case of pools without the COVID, if you do not have lifeguards, we would recommend that signage at the pool, basically swim at your own risk. So I think sure. I would agree with that, what you're doing and putting that sign on the fitness area. I think that's a good idea to put signage up. Anything is going to help in the event that you do have a claim as far as providing a defense against, allegations that are presented.
Okay. That, I think there was a question that came up that was very similar. Can you put up signage basically saying use at your own risk, specifically in the case of COVID? Use at your own risk. Does that help, or is that advisable?
Yes, it's advisable. Absolutely. Does it help when you're defending the lawsuit? Yes, it helps, but it helps with the proofs at the trial. Are there potential defenses you could try and come up with to get out of a case sooner? Yes, I can think of some ideas, but you never know what a judge is going to do with that. And so again, the real risk is not being found liable for having given someone COVID. I mean, it's possible, but the real risk is you end up paying for that defense yourself.
Yeah, that's what you just started talking about there in the question is already assuming that you're in court. Right?
Right.
Like that this is like you have to defend yourself against this, and so the way that you avoid ending up in court is by not having it open, is what I'm assuming.
Unfortunately, that's the only safe bet. I think, ironically, Nancy, you can tell me if that's right, but if someone sues the board for not opening a common element, that probably would be covered. Probably.
Well, I was going to mention that you do have a directors and officers policy, and that policy does cover wrongful acts. Whether, again, it's how the claim is presented. You would not want the claim to be presented as a bodily injury claim. Bodily injury is not covered under a director and officer policy. So, but if it's trying to open a pool and someone's upset that the pool's not open and they file a suit, that has potential to have some coverage under the directors and officers policy.
Okay, so you actually just hit Tiffany's question from the chat here. That what does the directors and officers insurance cover? And by saying the bodily injury is not covered, but the wrongful acts like withholding an amenity that they're paying dues for and whatnot, if that was a case brought against them, they could likely be covered. Whereas if they opened something and ended up with somebody catching the disease, that's not the wrongful act, that's the bodily harm.
Right. We would prefer to see someone not doing something rather than doing something on a go-forward basis. The reason I mentioned bodily injury and the directors and officers is it really depends how the claim is presented. If it's not presented as a bodily injury claim and just as that someone wants something, they want the pool open or they want the exercise room open, that may be a claim that could be defended under the directors and officers policy.
I want the ability to hurt myself.
Right.
Okay, so I think a lot of the community room discussion that we had probably also applies to rooftop decks and outdoor spaces, except for the fact that it may not require reservations. It probably doesn't require reservations to access these.
Right. I can speak for us. It does not require reservation. For us also, we have a very large deck where you can probably safely social distance 40 or 50 people. It is the entire length of the building. So it's been a big debate because it's so large, and especially as owners are super eager to get outside and the weather's turned. There's that question of, if we can safely be up there at a 6-foot distance, why can't we use it? And so that's been at the board's feet. We've actually had a regular board meeting twice and a now special board meeting about it. So it is a hot topic. But our recommendation has and will continue to be to simply follow the guidelines that the governor has put forth. And I think Matt can probably opine best on this, but there's been a lot of commentary about those recommendations because, unfortunately, I think, Matt, you mentioned this earlier, that a lot of the pages sort of say should, and we recommend. They're not written like law, essentially, and so we have some board members that sort of dig that apart and are feeling like these restrictions don't apply to them because they are not public pools, or they're not the East Bank Club, things like that. They're not public facilities that are paid for with these amenities. And naturally, our recommendation is this applies to us as well. But that's been a challenge for us, and I'm sure it has been for others too.
So I've looked at this as our job, whether it's the attorney, insurance, management, is to advise the client of the potential risk they're taking on. But at the end of the day, we don't make that decision for them. So, as long as we make it abundantly clear, if you open the pool, the rooftop deck, this, that, or the other, because the question I keep getting, can I do this? Is this safe? First of all, none of us are epidemiologists, so we're not going to answer that question. But two, you're taking a risk, and so then the next question is, once you've decided, yes, I want to take on this risk, what are the guidelines out there if we're going to do it anyways? Okay, you're knowingly taking it on. Here's what the governor says. Here's what IDPH, CDC, your insurance carrier may have guidelines for you as well. You should check all these and make sure you're following them. And there's a lot of boxes to check. The other thing I was going to say is you started with, because these are so big, Brandon, can just people go up there as long as they stay 6 feet apart? One question I have gotten is, well, what if I want to go up with a group of 10, or what if we have several groups of 10 that want to go up? What can we do? And one of the guidelines, just so everyone's aware, is if you have multiple groups of 10, those groups of 10 have to be at least 30 feet apart. So there's more to it than a group here, group there, group, there. You have to measure those out too. And I think you actually have to have markings out showing where those spacings would be.
Interesting. Right. The next thing that we've talked about a little bit and started to go into are the gyms, fitness areas.
Everybody we're all cringing.
Well, I think that one thing that brings up that cringe response is just all of this, all of the information that we've heard, whether it's 100% accurate or not, about where it lives, how long it lives, and how it's spread. Like the thought of bodily fluids, of sweat being left on machines, and people coming back in, even if you're social distancing at 6 feet apart, probably brings up different issues. So is this one where it's like categorically don't think about opening this one, it's not a good idea, or are there steps that can be taken?
I think most condominiums, the fitness centers are not large. I know there are exceptions out there, but when we hear from one day, how long it survives in the air, and then additional advice the next day, or maybe that was wrong, maybe it was right. Really, none of us know exactly what the transmission is and how it's transmitting from one individual to another. So I just would think it would be hard to be 100% sure that if someone's exercised in that room, that it's okay for the next person to come in. I just don't know how you know if that area is clear.
And taking that analysis one step further, we started off talking about safeguarding employees. You're going to have to send employees in to go clean it up in between uses, so you're putting them at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So during phase 2, we closed for that reason. There was a lot of pushback, and one of the sticking points for us was the employees are uncomfortable cleaning this space. And to Nancy's point, there was a lot of communication put out there about how COVID transfers in respiratory droplets and things like that, and people are definitely not wearing masks when they're running on the treadmill. So from a practical standpoint, it made absolute sense that this space should just not be open, right? And really, from management's perspective, it was, we really need to keep the staff safe. So either if you're going to continue before things were kind of more obvious that it needed to close, we went through all the options of like, do we, keep the risk sign up and people have to clean it themselves, or do we hire a professional firm to clean it? All these other options. But the reality was, it just seemed like the risk benefit was so out of balance. And so now as we go into phase 3, looking at some of those recommendations, I think it was spaces like this could be open for like single use or like one-on-one personal training, I think. So that's what we did. We used Building Link, which I'm sure many of you out there have. And we made it a reservation space, which it wasn't before. And so people can reserve an hour at a time. It's still at their own risk. It's closed 1 hour a day for staff cleaning, so we're super clear about it gets cleaned once. Other than that, you need to maintain it. And, although it wasn't necessarily our primary recommendation, this was the sort of way the board amongst themselves negotiated to get it back open, is the single use throughout the day. So it's been working thus far. It's only been, a handful of days. But at least when you're in there alone or with someone else that's in your household.
I guess I'll add some uncomfortable guidance on the workers' compensation, since I brought up the fact that Governor Pritzker signed the workers' compensation. I mean, one of the issues that the state had when the governor initially said that the essential workers would be covered under workers' compensation is businesses came back and the retail and manufacturing came back and said, hey, well, we don't want our experience modification to increase. How is this going to count on our losses on a go-forward basis? So ultimately, what was decided would be that any employee cases that are reported under the workers' compensation would not go against the experience modification and would not be included in the losses. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day, the state as a whole may not see increases in workers' compensation rates. But this is something that has been put into effect for mid-March through the end of the year. So most likely it's not something, hopefully we'll have a vaccine that will not be extended from year to year. So you may not see a big change as far as premium, or you will not see it counted against your loss record. So I just wanted to add that in. I know it's...
Do you mind
no
jumping a little bit more into the workers' compensation right now?
Disease, but it's important to know.
I do have another question about workers' compensation, if you're willing to jump into a little bit more about that right now.
Sure.
So for the workers' compensation, you had mentioned it's not going to count into the experience adjustments. So
Right.
what counts for this, what was signed in by Governor Pritzker, and what would the exclusions be for that? Like, does it still cover an employee that wasn't following PPE guidance?
Well, there's a number of things that can come into play, and that would be one of the things that could be considered when the Workers' Compensation if the case comes before the Workers' Compensation Commission and it's disputed, that could come into consideration. This was just signed on Friday, so I'm not really an expert on it, but they did give some guidance as far as if the association was following best practices and did provide, a reasonable way of not catching COVID-19, that would be considered. Also, again, if the employee was not at work for the last 14 days, or you could prove that they caught it from an alternate source, a family member, or if there was other information that you were able to provide. So, I don't know how that will all play into the decision, because these are really just guidelines that were released, and I haven't seen it in practice yet, so I don't know how it will work. I just know that it was a negotiated agreement, because initially I feel like the governor wanted to make sure that essential workers were covered, which is important because you're expected to be at work, and we need to provide coverage. However, when business came back, manufacturing and retail, saying, hey, we don't want to get stuck with this bill at the end of the day, our workers' compensation rates are going to go up, they also took that into consideration and said that it wouldn't count against your experience modification, won't count against your losses. And this is for a set time period. As of now, it's until the end of the year.
All right. Very good. Very good. So I know one thing that we need to make sure that we cover before we get out of our discussion here today is going to be the hot topic on everybody's minds, and that's going to be pools. So how can you open if you should open? Which I'm guessing the answer across the board is going to be probably it's not the best idea to open, but if you do, what's going to be your most defensible way of opening?
So I guess I'll start. Obviously, after the no comma, but so again, the IDPH put out some guidelines, CDC as well, and I can't recommend enough checking those sources, regularly because it's always changing. But this came out June 5th, and it says during phase 3, swimming facilities licensed by the IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health, are not to be opened except for lap swimming, diving, swimming lessons, swim team practices, and therapy pool use. Water parks, bathing beaches are not to be opened in phase 3. So if you're opening the pool for people to lounge around, I think that's a pretty clear no under even the governor's restrictions. If you're going to use it for those other ones, putting up signs are recommended. I'll read it to you. Operators should display signage at entry with guidelines for face covering, social distancing, and cleaning protocols. Operators should provide updates to employees and customers on COVID-19 and swimming facility policies via its website or social media channels. So I mean, right off the bat, that's where I would go to start, is think about the signage, swim at your own risk, be aware COVID is an invisible, problem and cannot be contained. So you are doing this at your own risk. We've talked about waivers. If you're going to open up pools, take those precautions. I don't know, talk to your pool professional about what, if any, steps and guidelines they have, in addition to talking to insurance.
My position is really, I don't know how the coverage will defend in the event of a bodily injury claim that would come from the pool. So I would not advise opening the pool, but that's, again, it's a decision for each association.
Question for Matthew right quick before we get too much deeper in. Was the link to the to what you were citing, is that one of the ones that you sent me earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so someone wanted which one was it? Swimming facility guidelines from DPH?
Yep, correct.
All right. I'm going to post that one in the chat. Go ahead, Serena. Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I was just going to say that, aside from the obvious recommendations, which we also said, let's defer to our attorney, some of the things that we've tried to encourage the board to consider is separating. So let's assume that they want to continue to open anyways. We have looked at options to split the day up among different groups of people. So lap swim is at a certain time, and then kids play is at a different time, and then keeping the number of children which obviously will bring about more people because they'll come with their adult guardians, and separating groups throughout the day just to try to limit a huge influx of people, from 10 to 2 in the afternoon when it seems to be a prime time. So we've tried to advise that, and also simply just with the pool itself, just making sure that they are able to keep distance. So having an attendant. We are not normally an association that has an attendant, so we've recommended that they use someone, a security guard. We don't have a lifeguard, but someone that can be there as a reminder and kind of make sure that people are set up. We've purchased the floor signs and things like that. And one of the things, just if you're there trying to sort of educate your board who's pushing back on really opening up, is we are licensed by the state of Illinois, and a lot of those licenses, unless you got your license early, their current message, if you call them, says they're not issuing any other licenses till August 27th. I don't know why that's the magic date, but they don't have people in the office currently, from what we understand, or at least people that are taking phone calls. And if you don't have a pool license, technically you shouldn't be open. So that is something you can also say to your board, this is an additional risk you're taking if you move forward to opening this facility without the proper posted licensure.
Okay, so there's questions that we're getting about conflicting information. So there's guidelines that are being given for community pools, and that seems to be a conflict between city and state. And also, there's a question about whether those community guidelines even apply to community associations. And I'm going to throw a guess out here because I see Matt's response, but I'm going to guess that the reason that community associations might not fall under those community pool guidelines is going to be because they're not public pools, they're private pools.
That's certainly the argument, but the guidelines say they apply to any pools licensed by the IDPH, and they don't distinguish between commercial pools and private pools. So I would err on the side of it does apply to these private pools. No, they're not private. They're private, but they're community pools. Private pools in your backyard of your single family home, and you're the only one using it, and it's probably not licensed either. But at your community association, it should be licensed, and it doesn't distinguish. It says, and I'll read it again. During phase 3, swimming facilities licensed by IDPH are not to be opened except for lap swimming, ... It doesn't say commercial pools. It doesn't say community pools. It doesn't exclude or include. It just says licensed by the IDPH. So I think that's pretty general. And if you think about what the governor's been doing this whole time, I mean, the whole purpose is to try and help people protect themselves and guard against this. And, if you're going to say, well, I'm not going down to the community pool, the suburban pool, the city pool, but I'll go down to my community pool, which still has 10, 15, however many people who want to get into it. It doesn't, I don't think that changes what his intent was. So I think I would err it does apply.
Okay, so then in that case, since the advice is, or what they're being advised is that pools that are certified can't open during phase 3, what about phase 4?
Tell you when we get there? If we get there?
There's questions in the chat about phase 4, like when phase 4 comes, and these guidelines are saying things like you can scan people for temperature before they enter the pool, kind of stuff. Is this going to be a possibility for opening pools?
Well, again, it allows you to open the pool for those specific reasons. But if you're opening it just so you can lounge and enjoy the day, it doesn't appear to allow that. And, I couldn't even guess what phase 4 is going to look like right now. Wishful thinking.
Okay, so then a question from Ed on that point. by eliminating furniture at the pool, adding signage, limiting how many people are there, and let's say they do have an attendant that's taken temperatures, and you're doing all of these precautions, is this going to be the proper kind of precautions that would say you have an argument that you're doing the best you can as far as the legal defense and the insurance defense might be concerned?
Well, first, you would have to have a covered claim first. It does sound like you're taking on a lot of responsibility with the temperature taking, even though that would be a best practice. I started thinking about malpractice when Matt mentioned the temperature. There's just so many implications to the policy. We can, when you mentioned temperature, I was trying to remember exactly how the medical malpractice exclusion would apply to that. So when we go down this road, it's just without prior claims experience on how these claims will be adjusted, it's just so difficult to try to determine how the coverage will apply. So that's why I'm just cautious in providing advice, saying that it would be okay if the association opened. I mean, it is still a business, so they have to be responsible and be able to provide a defense that they were not negligent in allowing the community members to come onto the pool, sit around the pool, and not catch this disease.
And I guess what I would say is, those are all great ideas to try and create a factual defense to a claim. And again, the greater risk is not losing the case. The greater risk, although it's possible, the greater risk is you pay for that defense yourself, and it's going to cost a lot. But I mean, if you're going to do it, if you're going to open the pool, those are all ideas that should be used. And again, you should follow the guidance that's out there. Each one of those would be a piece of evidence you'd use to defend your actions as reasonable and not negligent. But, again, you may end up paying for that defense yourself. There was a point raised before that I thought was kind of interesting. It's a slightly off topic. Someone mentioned about you're paying for all these amenities that aren't in use. And I actually had to come up with one of my clients very recently was, well, we're paying for all these amenities. Why should I pay my assessments, or why should I pay all these? And the answer is the budget's the budget. They can take into account those expenses they didn't have next year when they're formulating the next budget if there's a surplus, or associations can theoretically revisit the budget, mid-year and see if something different is necessary. But that was one question that I've seen a lot of too.
All right. So, as far as any conflicting guidance goes, I think to go back to that, if there's the conflict between the IDPH and Chicago PDH on these pool opening guidance, which supersedes?
So if it depends on I guess what the conflict is, you'd have to look at it. But if it's Illinois says you can open pools, but Chicago says not yet, you have to follow Chicago. If Illinois says take temperature checks and Chicago says you don't need temperature checks, it's an interesting question. I mean, Chicago has home rule. It depends on where the authority for that rule came from, whether or not the home rule takes effect and Chicago could overrule the state. Typically, the state is superior. So I guess it'd be an individualized analysis.
Okay. Now, there are some other questions that kind of diverge away from pools. So I do want to give you guys an opportunity to say anything else that you might want to say about pool opening before I jump into other questions. And I do want to make another point. It's that if we're going to jump into more questions, I need to make sure it's okay with you guys because I want to respect your time. And I know that we did schedule from noon to 1, and we are at 1:06 now.
I'm happy to stay.
I'm happy to stay. I probably don't have any more comments on pool openings except for the swim at your own risk signs.
No.
All right. So let's take a look here. The first one, this is a strange one. It's referencing something that I'm assuming goes back to workers. It's that are there any comments or concerns to consider from the unions regarding reopening plans? And if we haven't heard those, I understand.
Oh, regarding the employees helping with the reopening the gyms and pools?
Yeah.
I don't have any knowledge of it.
The only thing I've seen from the unions, I have talked to them, and they're so far have been largely on board with doing the best you can to protect the employees. So I think that's kind of the theme.
Yeah, I would agree. We are a union building, and most of the communication has simply been, that as technically as their employer, really the only thing they've asked is that we provide the PPE, which is typical for most other employers. But otherwise, we designate what their task lists are, and if that means cleaning a fitness center, that's what that means. So we haven't had any pushback from that.
Okay. So another question that's come up is a little bit outside of the scope of what we've been talking about as far as amenities go, but as far as gatherings, like community garage sales, and then also playgrounds. I know before we started, you guys were talking a little bit about playgrounds, so we can go into that too. So as far as garage sales or things along those lines go, can communities still, allow that kind of activity? And then let's talk about playgrounds.
I think if there's less than 10 people or less, I think you can have an outdoor garage sale.
Yeah, we have a spring cleaning that has been delayed, so it's become a summer cleaning. And it tends to attract a lot of people who come and deliver things to our dumpsters that we rent for disposing old furniture and stuff. And so typically it was more of a free-for-all and just come and bring your stuff. And this year we added a schedule. So, we're just trying to keep things as close to the same as possible with the parameters that work. So now we just have 30-minute slots when they have to bring their things down to eliminate crowds.
All right.
In regard to the playgrounds or the tot lots, I did not think that they were open at this point, or...
So the guideline, the swimming facility guidelines, and someone's going to argue, well, it's swimming only, not everything, but it does say clubhouses, playgrounds, waiting areas, viewing areas, and other communal gathering places should be closed. And someone's going to argue it only says should. Someone's going to argue it's on the swimming facility guidelines and not general. I know where I live, the playgrounds are all still closed. Reasons cited are it's hard to keep them clean. It's hard to keep kids social distancing, especially of the age that would regularly be on the playgrounds. It seems like too many variables to responsibly open it up.
Okay, so this one is a question for Serena. You'd said that the licenses. This goes back to pools, I believe. You'd said that they will not be receiving licenses until August 27th. Was there a resource that we could send people to that would back that up?
It was just the voicemail recording that we received when we tried to call them. That's all. Yeah.
So calling them, that's the recorded message they've got?
Right.
Yeah, I've heard that from property managers that do not have a license. They're not expecting to receive one this summer.
All right. This one comes from Jennifer. What if the access to an amenity for an entire building goes through a single residential floor? Are there any specific liabilities or thoughts that you guys have on that kind of situation? I'm thinking that probably applies to you have to go through a residential floor to get to the pool, or it's the top floor and everybody needs to go through there if they wanted to get roof access.
Right. As far as cleaning that floor, I guess you would have to increase the amount due to the additional traffic. I'm not sure what the question is.
Okay, so like for a roof deck and everybody in the building that wants to use that roof. So to use this common element, everybody in the building needs to pass through the area that would only be used by residents of that floor otherwise. Are there any additional liabilities because you've got more traffic coming through this area?
I mean, again, I guess it depends on, always go back to, we really don't know how long that spray or droplets from your mouth can stay in the air. I don't know if anybody has ever really, I've heard so many different time frames for that. If it's an exaggeration that it could exist for an hour or two in the air. I mean, if that were the case, then if you have traffic walking through a hallway, common area hallway, additional traffic, it does affect the unit owners in that area. I just don't know how you would prevent, that from happening. If it's in the air, it's not like you can go by and, clean that area any more than you're already cleaning it.
Yeah.
I think to Nancy's point, one of the recommendations is that's been consistent. I know there's a lot of inconsistency, has been to, clean and disinfect high touch surfaces. And to Nancy's point, I think if it's a highly traveled area, then you might want to hit it a little more and pay a little more attention to it.
Okay. So then I think our last question that we're going to be able to get to here today is from the chat here. We do have a couple of other questions that were at the bottom of our agenda. This is a general insurance question as far as director and officer liability goes. So the board, let's say the board makes a decision that they want to reopen one of these amenities and it's in opposition to one of the individual board members. is that individual board member, if they have a personal umbrella policy, going to be protected if something comes up?
Is the board member going to be protected?
Yeah, against personal liability.
Some personal umbrella policies can provide additional coverage for outside responsibilities on a board, but they're also dramatically different. I couldn't comment on a personal liability policy. Most of the policies that would provide that coverage are probably more on the high end, high net worth, maybe a Chubb or Pure Insurance company. So the director coverage, officer and director coverage, the main primary coverage is going to be on the director and officer policy, which provides coverage for former and current board members. If there's a claim regarding what we would refer to as, a non-monetary claim where someone has a dispute over opening or not opening, that's the type of situation that could be covered, that could provide defense under the directors and officers coverage.
Okay. And then I think we covered actually the questions we had in the agenda, except maybe this one specifically. If we've got an amenity where residents and owners are only being allowed, are the adult children or grandchildren allowed to be a guest of them at the pool during COVID-19?
Serena, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we put the restriction on all these amenities that we are opening for no guests. And so we had that question similarly, what if my girlfriend or boyfriend is here 5 nights a week, right? So can they come to the pool with me, kind of thing? And we, in an effort to not be discriminatory and to be as, I guess, streamlined across the board, we simply said, if you are not a registered resident in some capacity in our system, meaning you don't have a current lease or you're not an owner on a deed, you're a guest, and therefore you cannot use these facilities for the time being.
All right. Great. Now I want to bring us to our last thing here, which is just going to be closing thoughts. So closing thoughts, we're going to go from left to right here. So just give us your wrap up from today. And Nancy, if all you want to say is no, that's fine. No, but I just want to hear, how do you sum up the guidance that you're given as far as these association amenities go?
Well, I wish I could provide better guidance as far as, how the policies would react and, how claims would be paid. It's just, without any prior claim history and without court decisions, it's just difficult to provide that guidance. So I do err on the side of caution. Being a unit owner myself, I do understand when you're an owner, it's your liability. So I would prefer to, in my situation, to err on the side of caution and not invite that liability lawsuit. Also realizing that everybody's kind of stuck in their unit right now, so it's a difficult situation. There's really nowhere for the unit owners to go, and it's been now 3 months. We just don't know when it's going to end. So I feel your pain. I wish I had better news for you, but I would encourage you to look at this and be conservative when you're deciding on opening your common areas.
All right. Serena.
I think from a management perspective, the best thing you can do is put forth the recommendations that are supported by your local authorities. So in our cases, obviously, I think it's unfortunate that some of these guidelines put forth by the governor aren't as clear, I think, as we might want. But I think we have to be practical and sort of level with your board and say, the entire country was shut down for 3 months. I don't think you need to open the pool, right? So there has to be some sort of common sense that you put forth, but ultimately just know that it is their decision. And so whatever your recommendations are, put them in writing. So if they also, probably from an insurance perspective, if they decide to move forward against any of these local authority guides, you're sort of covering your own professional status and license by putting forth your recommendation in writing. Whether or not they follow it is up to them.
All right, and Matt.
First, Brandon, thank you, and thanks CAI for having us here. And Serena and Nancy, this was a lot of fun, so thank you both. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. And thank you to participants. I think there's a lot of people and a lot of good questions. So, we're here to help you manage your risk and manage your associations. Just looking at the 10,000 foot view of it, at the end of the day, boards, you have a fiduciary duty to your unit owners. And one of the first things a lot of the declarations say is for the health and safety of the property. So if you take a step back from, what all this and think about what does that mean, that's a lot of responsibility to take on. And, you should look to first and foremost your property manager, and then look to your experts, look to Nancy, look to your attorney, look to the people who are dealing with these issues for guidance, and we'll try and help you manage your risk, even if it's not something you want to hear. If the answer is no. We're telling to you for a good reason, because we're trying to keep your risk as low as possible. But if you do, despite, that admonishment, choose to go forward, we'll try and help you do so in the best way you can. So that would be my close.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being the panelists here today. In case it hasn't been mentioned otherwise, you guys are all volunteers for CAI, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
members of our education committee, and so you guys thought that this would be something extremely important for us to start talking about, because there are obviously, based on the chat today, so many questions about this specific topic. And so I want to thank you guys for taking the initiative to pull this all together. You guys, awesome members of a committee, and I want to make sure that that's known in the chat here, that this is a great effort by you guys to make sure, on behalf of CAI, that we're getting information out, because it's our objective to be at the front end of the information here. And it's great that we're able to do so. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And I mentioned it earlier, but the replay here today, if you're not one of the hundreds of people that have logged in to watch at least part of this here today, I think at one point we had more than 200 concurrent viewers, and I know that it kind of ebbs and flows with people as they come in and go out. So there's been a lot of people that have seen this so far, but if you missed today's presentation, or you missed part of it, then you can find it here, same link as you're at right now watching us live. You'll be able to re-watch it. And then also we're going to be re-releasing it as an episode of the Common Interest podcast, which will come out on Tuesday. You can find the Common Interest podcast at Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. And so from CAI Illinois, thank you all for coming to participate in the panel today, and good luck in your association, whether or not you do decide to open your association amenities.
Thanks.
Thank you.